It was upon Holy Terror that the gene seed for the Void Hawks was initially sequenced and prepared for chapter creation. Selected initially to become a new Astartes Praeses chapter guarding the region surrounding the Eye of Terror against Chaos incursion, the Void Hawks were brought to life deep beneath the surface of the Imperium's heart, their base gene stock taken from the Raven Guard chapter. It was considered only right that a new Astartes Praeses chapter, dedicated to protecting the Imperium of Man, should be founded in the site of the Holy Throne itself. So it was that the 24th founding would be the Void Hawks' official birth, but all records of their creation would be expunged or redacted, their creation kept secret from the eyes of the enemy. After a successful founding, the chapter was brought to full strength, its warriors honing their skills on Terra, Luna, and far, far beyond. Scout companies hunted the deadly forests of Death Worlds, or plundered the depths of sprawling hive cities, learning urban warfare, stealth, subterfuge, reconnaissance, assassination, and city fighting in the 41st millennium. Their guerrilla tactics honed, the tactics of their gene sires perfected, the Void Hawks were ready for war. Having a fortress monastery and full Astartes facilities constructed and awaiting their arrival, the newly created Void Hawk fleet, along with its Mechanicus ships, Astra Militarum cohort, civilian ancillaries, and dedicated entourage, disembarked Terra towards Endux, their new homeworld, situated near the Eye of Terror. Unbeknownst to all amongst the fleet, the Navigator Prime on board the Void Hawk flagship Hammer of Faith had been slowly, subtly manipulated by the forces of chaos. For weeks beforehand, the mind of the Navigator had been slowly, subtly shifted. He was no longer in full control of his own mind, as Tzeentch's chosen avatar, a lord of change who called himself Umbraga, now inhabited the mind of the Navigator, his physical form like a puppet on a string to the demon. With his puppet ready to act, he waited for the right time to emerge. The fleet had full muster and arranged at the Mandible Point between Terra and Mars. The Navigator Prime began to open the passage to the warp. Seeing his opportunity, Umbraga struck. The Navigator erupted into full demonic possession as the fleet translated, Tzeentch revealing his avatar by pouring unbridled energy into the Navigator's fragile body. Bursting forth in a bloody orgy of psychic fire and metaphysical violence, the demon revealed its true form. Huge wings, glittering with psychic radiation and cosmic fire, glowed with dark prismatic glares that burned the eyes to look at. A huge head, bird-like with a knife-sharp tip, hung suspended from a serpentine neck. Feathers like shards of tourmaline glinted across the demon's form, seemingly soft and delicate, yet sword-like in countenance. Robe swirling, staff flaring into existence in his right-clawed hand, the demon immediately cast his will over the other psychic minds within his mental reach. The Navigator's thralls amplified the will of the demon before guttering out like spent candles before a firestorm. The Gellerfields and the nearby ships began failing as they were caught between worlds and torn asunder by the barbaric psychic barrage from within, the navigators on the nearby ships being blasted to ash by the psychic force of the onslaught. Their thralls were less fortunate, with Tzeentch's demons taking possession of their ragdoll forms and surging forth amid the psychic inferno. Multiplying and spreading from the navigation chambers on each ship, they began the carnage they were created for, possessing, killing, indiscriminately. The Void Hawks on board the ships were instantly active and began the process of attempting to repel boarders. The civilian cohorts on board the ships attempted to make for the navigator's chambers, but on each ship they were met with walking walls of fire, claw, and beak, as demons poured through secured bulkheads and hatchways with impunity. Eventually, with significant effort and loss of life, the areas surrounding the navigator's chambers were isolated, either by firepower, librarious discipline, or strength of will, the Astartes stopping the total incursion of each ship. But this was simply the beginning, as the ships were still undergoing translation into the warp, and the navigator chambers of each ship still swarmed with demons. With a deafening psychic shrill, the demons called forth their brethren from the warp coalescing around the ships. With no Gellerfields to protect them, the ships shone like beacons for the hungry denizens of the underverse. With horrifying rapidity, thousands of demons and their ilk swarmed into existence from each and every shadow, vent, duct, and grill. Many servitors, fleet staff, Astartes, and civilians were slain in the initial assault, as demons and horrors of all shapes and sizes appeared within the bowels of the fleet and wrought bloody havoc against the already disordered formation of survivors. Tanks rolled along corridors, and jump-pack-equipped Astartes ambushed demons from above, as the forces of chaos slowly lost the ground they had taken aboard the ships. Dreadnoughts scoured the inner and outer surfaces of the ships, as the chapter's librarians attempted to restore some kind of protection against the warp. The fleet eventually began to regain cohesion, as the Astartes and Terminator companies, along with vehicle detachments, scoured the great ships of the Chaos forces invading them, and the presence of the warp began to dissipate under the withering strength of the librarians' efforts. Umbraga, the Lord of Change, besieged by Terminators of the First Company, trapped in the navigator chambers on board the Hammer of Faith, sensed the turning of the tide of battle. Seeing that the fleet was adrift, without reinforcements, and cut off from the rest of the Imperium within the warp, the demon flared with psychic fire before disappearing without a trace, leaving behind countless horrors to plague the fleet's deeper levels. The boarders repelled temporarily from the upper control decks, the fleet held station for a moment. Ranking officials made a consensus, and as one, the remaining fleet attempted to move out to wander blindly through the warp, unguided by navigators and defenseless against the predations of the surrounding madness of psychic energy. Behind them, a graveyard of ships was left behind. Cold corpses and glittering rictus grins, left floating in the void between worlds. For what would later be determined to be roughly 900 years, the fleet wandered through the immaterium, encountering countless horrors of both the real and the mundane. Within the fleet, rationing was taking severe tolls on the civilian population, already struggling under the mental strain of constant warp conflict. Power struggles, starvation, ambition, pride. All the typical human fallacies and dramas played themselves out inside the protective metal shells of their ships, until only despair and survival remained. Beyond these fragile layers, the warp roared with its metaphysical malevolence. Myriad demon worlds dotted the heavens, be they shocking geometric forms made of living crystal, whole planets made of rotting flesh and pustulence, unearthly rocks spewing fire in great orbital arcs around them, shimmering golden orbs of absolute perfection, all gliding between glowering lights and shimmering waves of non-existence. Populating these gulfs between worlds, roving chaos warbands and unknown horrors of planetary scale hunted the ships through their passage, all the while suffering myriad invasions and boardings. With the continuous efforts of the librarians, the rapid response tactics of the Voidhawks, and the sheer determination of the civilian and Mechanicus cohort, the fleet somehow survived, although not without suffering grievous casualties along the way. The Titan legions of House Vortis accompanying the fleet were utterly and completely annihilated when the Imperator Warlord Titan Tiamus fell to possession, its plasma annihilator firing indiscriminately within the great hull of the Mechanicus ship. Scoring several direct hits on the ship's drive unit, its Moderati detonated the fusion cores just as the ship itself became a temporary new star in the unheavens. Within the chapter, the Voidhawk chaplains kept the faith of their battle brothers strong, becoming incredible figures of faith and worship amongst the chapter's remaining companies, their acts of faith and inspiration manifesting directly in the immaterium, creating saint-like beings in the chapels where deathly visages once reigned supreme. The chapter master led with an indomitable strength of will, ensuring that the tactics the Astartes were training with were ever-changing, like their foe, that their equipment was in rotation so each Astartes mastered every weapon, and that their minds were cleansed of impurity by the librarians and the chaplaincy daily. Inspired by the daily miracles of survival and faith that surrounded them, The chapter masters, along with their brethren, renewed their faith daily under the sight of the chaplains in preparation for the constant onslaught of the warp. Their faith in the Emperor remained resolute and at times was their only guiding light in the swirling darkness of shadows. The chaplains had become such icons amongst the fury and madness of the world around them that they themselves became literal figures of faith and purity, wings of shimmering light erupting from the back of some, incandescent halos playing around the skulls of others. The librarians felt tides of power they had never dreamt possible, gloaming with a dark potential everywhere they laid their gaze. Due to the extreme length of the Chaos sieges against the fleet and the mental horrors laid upon them, at times Astartes' warriors simply fell to the ground, dead from exhaustion, their genetics failing them after decades of constant wakefulness and starvation. Others found their reserves limitless, fueled by the righteous ardor of cleansing the warp from the inside out. The thought that their actions were aiding their battle brothers in the material realm, giving them vigor and zeal. One thing was for sure though, those space marines that died never stayed dead. The civilians, however, with their Mechanicus allies, fell in droves. There was little the Astartes could do for them, but they keenly felt their loss and mourned them at all times. In honor of those who had sacrificed themselves, or who were lost to chaos, the captains and senior officers had their white robes dyed red, to signify the enemy's blood shed in vengeance for those that had fallen, and the blood shed by the innocent in defense of the Imperium. In truth, the blood of both enemy and innocent alike had already made this symbol rather apparent to all. The warp was not without its boons, however. Hulks drifted through the warp, and once secured from their demonic inhabitants, became treasure troves in their own right. Ship classes thought extinct were repaired and pressed back into service by the surviving Mechanicus staff, now distributed amongst the fleet's tech marine contingent after the loss of their ship. Weapons not seen before the heresy, information of hive worlds as yet undiscovered, vehicles that were serviceable, purified, and pressed into service once again, all past the workbenches of the never-tiring tech marines, servitors, and artisans of Mars. The heights of the Imperium's hubris littered the warp, and the Voidhawks made good use of all they could salvage. Eventually, huge warp storms erupted through the Nether as the Noctis Aeternae formed across the galaxy, allowing glimpses of the material realm from the immaterium. A veteran sergeant on watch recognized a pattern formed by 4 stars, their light reaching deep into the immaterium. Considering this to be some far-flung sight from the Imperium, the sergeant rushed to relay the information. For the first time in 900 years, the possibility of hope had glimmered from beyond the veil of madness. Accepted as a holy sign from the Master of Sanctity and the Chief Librarian, the fleet oriented itself towards the barely visible, impossibly distant star system. The demons began the pursuit. Ships of all class and shapes swirled from the warp's deep currents, the hellborn ships sending themselves at the fleet with determined fervor, each wave more aggressively attacking, more indiscriminate than the previous. The Voidhawks, seeing the pursuant apocalypse, planned an extreme course of action. Their ragtag fleet of patched, fixed, and jury-rigged ships already straining, their desperate plan put into effect. Evacuating an Astartes battle barge, the ship was sent ahead of the fleet at maximum speed, its engines set to self-destruct at the last moment. The demons were held back as their final surge laid withering fire on the survivors, but suddenly blinked out of existence as the battle barge's engines detonated. The enormous explosion of force, normally creating a rift to the warp when occurring in real space, instead tore a hole back to the material realm. Its shockwave blasted the Chaos forces back into the deeper shadows of the warp, and for a second, a moment, the Voidhawks had a singular chance at escape. The fleet, close behind the sacrificial ship, bore the brunt of the explosion, riding out the arcane firestorm to pour through the hole back into the material universe. The psychic flare of the explosion attracted the attention of the captain of a nearby Raven Guard ship, who, though initially mistrustful of the fleet emerging from the warp in such a manner, had received sign from the navigator that black wings of hope and fire were to be born from the heavens, and were soon overjoyed to be reunited with their genetic brethren. With the help of the Raven Guard ships and their escorts, The Voidhawks soon made their way to complete their first and so far only mission, to take ownership of the fortress monastery awaiting them on Endux. Unfortunately, it turned out an old enemy had reached their homeworld ahead of them. The Lord of Change that stranded the chapter in the warp, who had been the mastermind of the chapter's decimation by attrition, had left them only to take possession of their intended homeworld in their absence. Now under the control of Zinch and his forces, the combined might of the Raven Guard and the Voidhawks faced an uphill struggle to reclaim the former Astartes world. Fortunately, 900 years of facing constant chaos siege had honed the Voidhawks into consummate siege warriors, capable of carrying out perfect strikes and bombardments to crack open the hardest of emplacements, but also perfectly able to break the fiercest of siege lines with but a single charge. Under the leadership of the Chapter Master, armed with a pair of crackling lightning claws and a jetpack of singular construction, the Voidhawks swept with a righteous fury through the Chaos forces. Possessed of a singular rage and force as they sought to complete their first and thus far only mission. The warriors of the chapter would later recall in remembrance that they felt as if the Emperor himself was fighting alongside them during the scouring of Endux. Other battle brothers would say that he had been there all along, his touch, his presence, holding back the ruinous and corrupting power of the warp. At the tip of the charge, the chapter master bloodied his claws, hunting his prey, the very demon that had brought this ruin upon them. Finally, Umbraga, the Lord of Change that had claimed the monastery for himself and doomed over half the chapter to a bloody death in the warp, emerged amongst the demon horde. The chapter master ignited his jump pack and set upon the great winged demon as they both took to the skies, locked in combat. With incredible strength, the chapter master blocked the psychic bolts from the demon, their warp-born force guttering to nothing against this artificial armor, specially warded against chaos, and created in the warp itself by the genius of the Techmarines and Mechanicus combined. With great speed, he dodged the claws and wings of the glittering demon, and gained a moment's advantage as he swung back and around Umbraga. Unleashing a millennia of rage, he surged forth and clawed through the wings of the demon, and with a further blow sent him spiraling to the ground. Through the azure spire of his citadel did the demon fall, eventually burning away, stopping with an earth-shaking collision against a stone slab of immense size. As the debris landed from an impact felt in both the warp and the realm of man, the demon was seen to be slain, his deformed, broken, wingless body burning to blue embers over his profane altar. The psychic shockwave of his banishment blasted the remaining demonic forces to ash, and the Voidhawks, vindicated, finally took possession of their new homeworld. After 900 years, with so many battle brothers lost, the chapter sought immediately to restore itself to fighting strength. With so much rebuilding and recovery to do, the Voidhawks set out to claim the glory they had long been denied. The chapter master, architect of the chapter's survival, decided to dedicate certain chapter symbols to those that had fallen during their escape from hell, so that no new initiates would be unfamiliar with their history and provenance. First, he would forgo his name, and all those who would come after him. They would be known as Lords of the Void, to show the mastery of void survival the chapter had exhibited, but also he would carry with him the names of every soul who was lost to the warp. His final words, as a named Astartes, were that no single brother's name should be more important than the thousands of names spoken no more. Alongside this, the previously jet black armor of the Voidhawks was marked in 4 places, the knee pads and the backpack vents, in white to represent the formation of 4 stars that had led the chapter from the warp. To this day, it is unknown what system it represents. The veteran who identified it could no longer do so on any given star chart. The Inquisition, at first mistrustful and in outright disapproval of this chapter returning to active service, eventually relented after a thorough inspection of the chapter and its gene seed. But most of all, after a very close inspection of the great many relics that they had captured and reclaimed from demon worlds and warlords, and the information regarding a certain Primarch thought lost to the warp. Their tactics, honed by constant warfare with chaos, by relentless invasions and sieges by the unreal and the inhuman, the Voidhawks had become the ideal warriors to fight the forces of the 13th Black Crusade. And with the Astartes forces engaged in myriad wars across the Imperium and beyond, the chapter was immediately pressed into service, all efforts dedicated to restoring the original strength of the chapter. Under supervision, the chapter now operates with inquisitorial approval in their original role as Astartes Praises, defenders against chaos, the first great bulwark against the last great enemy.